Hey listeners, it's Jana. Welcome back to Grief Out Loud. Today's episode is a bit of a dream come true. Back in 2020, when there was an explosion of virtual learning opportunities, I came across Joél Simone, also known as the Grave Woman. And she was talking about how important it is for death care professionals to be educated on how to take care of the bodies and the hair of Black and African Americans in culturally sensitive ways. 6 years later, I finally worked up the courage to send her a message and ask if she would be a guest on the show. Thankfully, she said yes. Joél is a death care professional, educator, and cultural advocate whose work spans funeral service, grief education, and cultural competency. But long before any of her formal training, Joél knew she was drawn to this work. When she was 8 years old, she drew a picture of herself standing in a cemetery with a microphone, declaring, "I am the grave woman." In this conversation, Joél and I talk about how that early curiosity grew into a career rooted in spirituality, ritual, and deep respect for culture. We explore what grief can teach us when we pay attention to the body, to the perspectives of children, and to the traditions shaped by ancestry and land. Joél shares how culture can be a form of medicine for grief, and why tending to ritual doesn't have to mean doing something formal or prescribed. Sometimes it looks like cooking a familiar meal or walking a beloved trail, or simply telling the truth about what hurts. We also talk about what the death care industry still needs to learn when it comes to serving Black and African American families, why cultural humility matters, and how grief is shaped by history, displacement, and belonging. I'm so grateful for Joél's honesty, insight, and storytelling in this episode. Okay, here's our conversation. Joél, welcome to Grief Out Loud. It's kind of a dream come true for me to have you on the show today.
Oh, thank you, Jen. I'm so excited to be here.
Your career arc has taken you many, many places in the death care field. What are you most interested in, engaged with these days?
Honestly, I am most interested in exploring spirituality around end of life, death, and grief care in a holistic way, having conversations about our chakras and how grief shows up in our bodies, and how having knowledge of our chakra systems can influence how we grieve. Exploring connection to whatever we believe is out there. I heard a girl on TikTok call it Gus, God, universe, source, and spirit, and bringing more of that into the conversation around death care and how it can help us navigate grief. In addition to talking about cultural competency, which is, I think, what I'm known most for.
Was there a particular moment or experience that led you to wanting to bring more of that spirituality and energetic sense into your work?
Oh, that's such a good question. Yes, and that experience has not been one experience, it's been the entire experience. So as a funeral director, I've worked with families from varying backgrounds, varying places in the world, and that have roots in cultures that I've never even heard of, right? But the common thread has seemed to be that we all want to believe that there's something better after this. We want peace and comfort. And there are things that we all do just innately that are deeply spiritual when we're navigating death and grief, whether we're 2 years old or whether we're 100 years old. And so I want to talk about those little flickers of light that I've seen that have been common within all of those spaces and with all of those communities.
I just had this image of everyone who's experiencing grief or facing end of life or helping someone go through end of life, all like writing the same book, even if they're using a very different language. And it seems like you're starting to see some of those common themes in that book, even if they are from different languages, different cadences, different backgrounds.
Absolutely. And that's kind of how I've grown to understand God. Um, it's they, him, her, whatever is it's expressing itself in so many different forms, and we're all speaking the same language, almost a different dialect.
So, in honoring your personal grief, who would you like to invite into the space with us today?
I would like to invite my Uncle Mark and my grandfather and my friend Miss Tracy. All three of them, trifecta.
Do you want to share a little bit about them?
Absolutely. I'll start with my grandfather. So my grandfather was just a phenomenal person, a phenomenal man, educator. I've heard that he was a completely different person before my sister and I were born, and that we cracked him open emotionally, so to speak. But I'm actually sitting right now in the house that he and my grandmother built on the land that they bought. And so I can't talk about where I've been or who I am without honoring him and all of my ancestors. My Uncle Mark was the person that introduced me to death care. He was a funeral director when I was a little girl, introduced me to the funeral home, the embalming room, and a lot of what I know and still practice to this day. And Miss Tracy, I met in my first official big girl death care job, working at Crestlawn Memorial Park in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm just so grateful for our friendship and the time I got to spend with her.
I don't know how little Joél was when you first started exploring this idea of working in the death care world. And it sounds like your Uncle Mark was really kind of the entry to that. So could you share a little, like, what's the origin story of how you ended up doing the work that you do?
Oh gosh, it's such an interesting story. Uncle Mark is a huge part of it, but if I had to pinpoint an origin point, I always talk about the picture that I drew when I was 8 years old of myself standing in a cemetery with a microphone and saying, "I am the grave woman." And I've now learned that I drew that picture after attending my great grandmother's funeral and asking questions of everyone, like, why is she sleeping in this box? And who did her hair? And why is she going in the ground? Questions a kid would ask about death. And I think I got on everyone's nerves except for my Uncle Mark. And that event was the beginning of probably tens of thousands of conversations that he and I would have throughout my life until the time of his death in 2015, about death, about life, about being a funeral professional. But Uncle Mark was the person that I didn't freak out with my questions, because that was his line of work. I saw him graduate from mortuary school. I don't remember how old I was, but I remember going with him to the funeral home for the first time and him taking me into the embalming room and telling me that this was a sacred place and it was a place that needed to be respected and I needed to be respectful of everyone that was in the care of the embalming room. And so I could talk on and on and on about Uncle Mark. He was like the funniest person I've ever met. I've not laughed the way that we laughed together. I've not had some of the in-depth conversations about death care and life and death and grief and all those things that he and I shared since he passed away, but he is definitely a big part of the story.
What was it like to be, well, how old were you when you first started in the industry?
As a professional,
Yeah.
I would say mortuary school, probably about 27 years old. Well, actually, no, I'd say 25, 26. I worked in the cemetery before going to mortuary school. So yeah, 25, 26 years old.
So you're basically a baby at 25,
I can
26.
looking at it from 40, I guess you're right. I was a baby.
I'm just wondering, what was it like as a young Black woman to start in that industry, even though you'd sort of been in the industry around your family? But what was it like to like step out into it on your own?
I remember driving to the cemetery the first day that I showed up for work, and I actually drove up to the mausoleum thinking it was the office, and it wasn't. It was a gorgeous mausoleum, and the land one of the landscapers there, or one of the cemetery gentlemen that took care of the land, pointing me down and saying the office is down there. That's where you want to go. And so it was equally exciting, nerve-wracking, but at the same time, it felt like home. I'd spent so much time in cemeteries with either my dad or, with my family, going to funerals with my Uncle Mark, that it wasn't scary in the sense that I didn't think I could handle it, but it was just like, oh my God, I'm finally here. And I'm getting paid to do this. You mean this, I get money for this? That's even better. Yeah,
So a sense of coming home.
absolutely. Absolutely.
What have you learned about grief from working in the funeral industry?
Everybody's grieving something. Everybody, any person you can think of, whether it's your mom, your grandma, that boss you hate, everybody is grieving something. And so it's taught me to be a lot kinder and gentler to myself and people.
In terms of the everybody's grieving something, and we always often say, well, we don't always, but we often say like grief is so different for everyone. You started out talking about some of the universals that you have seen. Are there other like really common threads in that grief that you've seen over the years?
It's so interesting. The first thing that comes to mind is that none of us know what to do with it. That's like the first thing. But the second thing is that we're trying really hard to look like we're not, or to seem like we're not, or to be the version of ourselves that existed before that grief came into our lives, or before we lost our person, our marriage, our business, our job, our relationship, our dog, whatever that thing is.
Trying so hard to go back to who we were before.
And I don't think that that exists.
And that's kind of fascinating to think about too, because part of it is, I would imagine, like wanting to go back to who you were back then because that person, place, or thing was there with you, like wanting to go back to that location where they are. So, an internal wish for that, but then also feeling external pressure from other people who know you as who you were back then. And they would like you to go back there too, so that they know how to interact with you.
That, and I think that we a lot of times find safety in what we thought was. And when we have to look at what life looks like without that thing or without that version of ourselves, that's very scary and intimidating.
Is there anything you found in your own experience, your own path through this, that helps you when you are in another doorway space of having to step into that unknown?
Ritual, embracing rituals. I'll just be transparent. I I went through a separation in late summer of last year, and I completely, for almost 2 months, was I don't even know where I was. Um, and looking back, the things that helped me get through that place, I don't even want to say out of that place, but through that place, were rituals. Whether it be being intentional about thoughts upon waking to the best of my ability, or showing up for an aqua aerobic class every day, or a big one for me has been walking, praying, being intentional about, okay, this is the food that I'm going to eat because it helps me feel better. And when I eat things like this that are sweet, maybe a little bit more fattening, I just don't feel as good. Or the ritual of crying, allowing space for that. And when I say the ritual of crying, not blaming myself, like creating the space emotionally for myself to say, I I'm going to allow myself to express my feelings and be okay with that, even if that means crying. And when I think about it, those are the same things or the same rituals or like the same rituals that helped me get through the death of my grandfather, helped me get through the death of my uncle, helped me navigate the death and the grief of Miss Tracy and other people that I've lost in other situations where I've had to face grief.
As you're outlining that, I was thinking about how when someone is alive, or a pet is alive, or a relationship is part of our lives, there's structure of how we engage with that person or that relationship. And when they're no longer here in their physical form, it's almost like we have to recreate new structures to give us some place to put ourselves through those rituals that you talked about.
Absolutely.
A big part of your work for many years has been helping the funeral home industry be more culturally aware and relevant, specifically for Black and African Americans. What do you think the industry still needs to do to better understand when it comes to serving Black and African American families?
I think the biggest thing is understanding that we're not a monolith. And I try to express that as much as I can in the offerings that I create and the work that I do, it's so important to understand that just because a person is an African American does not mean that they are Christian. It does not mean that they are from the United States or that their culture reflects United States culture. They could be from New York, but their cultural background could be Trinidadian. You know what I mean? So there are just so many different things. And even within culture, you have to make room for individuality and personal experience and personal feelings. And so I think the number one thing would be not seeing people as a monolith and also not responding in performative measures, but learning in through proactive means is important as well. I think a lot of times our industry and other industries as well, it's just business. Until a problem is a problem, there's no problem. We're not fixing what ain't broke, so to speak. But just because you're not aware of something being broken doesn't mean that it's not.
Is there an example of like a proactive thing or measure that you've either implemented or seen someone else implement in terms of being culturally responsive?
I'll use mortuary schools for an example. Mortuary schools are becoming a lot more proactive and progressive in the sense that they're bringing in Black hairstylists to come in and talk to students about, common basic things that are standard parts of the education for people that aren't Black or Indigenous or, you know, diverse in any way. And so I think that's a proactive measure that needs to be awarded or rewarded. Not even, I don't even want to say rewarded, that needs to be acknowledged. That was not something that was happening. God, 2012 was how many years ago? 14 years ago when I was in school. Yeah. And so imagine how many years it wasn't happening before that.
All of them.
Right.
And I know that's something that I feel like that was one of the first times you came on the radar for me, was giving a talk about, just hair care and how different that can be for different folks and things people don't even like think about.
Right. And I think another thing that people, and this is, I don't know if this is going to be a question that comes up or not. Now we need to have a conversation about creating safety and mitigating risk as far as people coming in and trusting our facilities as funeral homes, especially with everything happening with certain governmental agencies and federal agencies like ICE, that are kidnapping people off of the streets and out of schools and out of workplaces. How long do we think it will be before they're showing up at funerals, at cemeteries, and at funeral homes? So,
Yeah, there's organizations that are having to have conversations they've never had before around things like ensuring safety for people who are coming for services, whatever those services are.
absolutely.
As I was reading through your website and some of your other offerings, I saw that you had written that culture is the medicine for grief. And that really struck me. And I wondered if you could say a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. So that is our motto or slogan at the Multicultural Death and Grief Care Academy. And it honestly, to me, when I think about, again, those rituals and things that I've implemented and even taught over the years, they're so deeply tied to my culture, whether they be food related, whether they be music, whether they be religious or spiritual. And when I was building the website for the Multicultural Death and Grief Care Academy, I wanted one sentence that encapsulated what we stand for. And that was that sentence: culture is the medicine for grief. Now, we as death care professionals are the practitioners that distribute or that have influence on distributing that medication. But it also, to me, is almost a call to action for, from my perspective, consumers or everyday people as well, to lean in and learn about your culture, learn about your lineage, learn about your family's legacy, your cultural legacy, and to implement what you learn into your grief process.
It seems like it goes back to that idea of ritual again. And what are are there rituals that have already been created from culture that we can bring into the here and now for us?
Absolutely. And I want to be very clear when I say ritual. Ritual could be something as simple as cooking a meal that reminds you, like for me, when I cook, I think about Miss Tracy because that's what we did together all the time. That was the culture of our relationship. That ritual is the medicine when I'm grieving her. My grandfather, I think when I'm sitting in this house, when I'm sitting in this land, the culture of my childhood, so much of it was identified and created here. My thoughts and my relationship to family partially were built here, and with my father's side of the family as well. And so when I'm having those moments when I'm in grief about either my grandfather, my uncle, or anything in life, especially as I mentioned, going through divorce and separation, just being here has been a form of medicine, connection to the land, looking outside and literally being able to see myself, my sister, my family, my grandparents at the pool having a great time. That's medicine. That's my culture.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great point because I think that word ritual can be a little like, whoa, what does that mean? It has to be this big formal thing. And oftentimes it's just intentional routine or even just noticing routine, right? Can be ritual.
Or intention, setting an intention before you do something. Even like us having this conversation, you so clearly articulated your mission, why you're doing this podcast, why you wanted to speak to me. And it's like, oh, okay, this is now a ritual. We're participating in a ritual together. And this ritual will serve as medicine for someone who sees it, God only knows when.
Now we have a new tagline for Grief Out Loud. Thank you, Joelle. I want to talk a little bit more about the Multicultural Death Care Academy that you've created. And there's so many amazing workshops and offerings for folks who want to deepen their learning. And a big part of it has been this cultural immersion sort of tour journey that you've created for folks to learn more about the history and the culture of the Gullah Geechee people who are descendants of Africans who were enslaved along the Southeast United States coast. And what has that work meant to you?
It's been a homecoming, honestly. I grew up here in Beaufort, South Carolina. My family is of Gullah Geechee descent. We are natives to the land here. And I did not know half as much as I should have known growing up here. I did not have the appreciation of my culture in this area and just the beauty and vibrant nature that still exists here, amongst the Gullah Geechee people and here in Beaufort and the surrounding Sea Islands. And so it has been not only a homecoming for me, but each and every time I host the cultural immersion excursion, which has been twice and three times this year in October, it's like coming home for the first time and seeing it through the eyes of everyone that's participating. Um, Again, those cultural aspects, the food, the music, the faith, the spirituality, even talking about death and grief and the land and just all of those things has been such a beautiful experience. And to be able to share not only my hometown, but my family and culture with others has been, it's a gift to me. So yeah, anyone that's interested, please join us in October. The dates will be announced soon. But I'd love to have anyone that's interested come join us.
In that work that you've done to know your own history and your own family's culture, what stands out to you as either teachings or practices around end of life and grief that have been of support for you?
That's a really good question. I think just having a deeper understanding of some of the rituals performed when people are transitioning and after they die, especially as they relate to funerals. I learned this yesterday and I never thought about it. I know we've all heard the term cemetery, but the word graveyard is actually derived from Gullah Geechee culture. And it's called a graveyard because when you look outside, you're not seeing this manicured area, right? You're literally seeing graves in the yard, which means trees, grass, moss. It's not perfect. And that is how we bury our dead here. Yes, we have a national cemetery. Yes, we have church cemeteries. But even in those church cemeteries and cemeteries that have a level of perpetual care, you're still seeing a lot of untouched nature. And that can go all the way back to the way that West Africans buried their deceased. It wasn't something that was manicured, it wasn't something that was elaborate. It was simple and in flow with nature, AKA the graveyard.
Which also takes me back to you being 8 years old and declaring yourself the grave woman, not the funeral woman, but the grave woman.
The grave woman.
I'm not sure how to phrase this question, but I'm
Okay.
thinking about the area that you are in South Carolina and so many descendants of
Mhm.
enslaved people, and knowing that that time period, such a disruption in people being able to bury their dead in a way that was in alignment with how they've always done it, and to have so much interruption and banishment of their grief practices. What are you seeing in current day of people trying to reclaim where people are buried and reclaim where people were laid to rest?
That's such a good question. It's an important question. A big thing here is honoring the legacy of Gullah Geechee ancestors who were buried everywhere, right? And we have a lot of development coming into the area, and there's a lot of legal things happening around land. Land ownership is such a big deal for communities of color here, especially like in Beaufort and St. Helena, Ladies Island, Hilton Head, Bluffton, Charleston, those areas, Edisto, right? And so, what I'm seeing a lot of just as a person, and not even a professional from the outside in, is younger people coming back home, like myself, and living in family homes to ensure that the land is protected. Because for all I know, there could be people of African and Indian descent, Native American descent buried on my land. I don't know because a lot of the graves were unmarked. And so, should this land not be in my family anymore, it's not protected from development. And the developers don't necessarily have an interest in honoring the ancestors that came before us. They have a development in money. And so, what I say that to say that I see an awareness in now that millennial generation that I belong to having a vested interest, not just in land ownership, but in cultural preservation and preservation of our ancestors through perhaps leaving bigger cities. Like I came from Atlanta. I have about three classmates that I went to high school with that have moved back home for this same reason. And then I also see the fight happening to not have golf courses built on sacred lands. There are laws here in place that are supposed to protect Gullah Geechee land, but unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't always work out that way. And I'm sure that's something that's happening all over the place, but especially here.
Well, thank you for so thoroughly answering my blundering question that took me a bit to get to what I wanted to actually ask.
I felt like I rambled, so I hope I was like
Not at
clear
all.
on
That's that. I
something.
was like, yep, that's what I was going for. So thank you.
Okay.
I
Okay.
wanted to shift gears a little and talk about kids and teens in end of life rituals, mourning rituals, funerals, celebrations of life, homegoings. What do you think is important for families and also for death care professionals to consider when it comes to kids and teens?
For family, those are two totally different questions. So for families, I can only speak from my experience because I don't have children. So for families, I think it's important that people understand, parents, families understand that children aren't stupid. They're not ignorant to what's going on. And even though they may not be able to articulate what they're feeling in a way that makes sense to us, they're experiencing change as well. As a professional, one of the things that I learned very early on from watching a child look at their mother in the casket is to see my work from their perspective as well. Because a lot of times, I mean, just think about it. I'm taller than a child. I'm the average funeral professional is taller than a child, and doing their work, whether it be embalming or makeup or having a conversation with someone, we're having that conversation on this level physically, right? Or preparing a decedent from this level physically. And it wasn't until I watched, I want to say it was a little girl looking at her mom in the casket, that I realized, oh my God, I don't even know if I did her makeup right because this child is looking up, not down. And so it really, that little nuance shifted the way that I cared for makeup, something as simple as makeup, right? Or lighting or floral arrangements, because a child is looking up during death and grief. And with that being said, I think it's important that we as adults, family members, community members, and professionals be able to not necessarily look down, but come down to their perspectives and let them teach us. What that looks like, I don't know. But I remember being that curious child and my uncle coming down to my perspective, and it changed my life. And I feel like it's our responsibility as adults to do the same, especially when it comes to death and grief. And whether that be through, like, my role as a professional, but even as a parent, I'd imagine how do you come down to that child's level? I guess you could tell me more about that than I could tell you.
No, I love that because so often people want to know exactly what to do, right? Do we do this? Do we do that? Do we say this? Do we say that? And you can sort of get into the details with folks, but to step back and be like, what's our overarching concept, right? And our overarching concept is to give kids honest information and allow them to make decisions and give them choices. And I love that you're adding into there and try to imagine what they're seeing, feeling, and experiencing from their actual literal perspective and how that shifted your work. And that becomes another global concept to touch back into every time a little detailed question comes up, to be like, how are the kids seeing it? How are the teens experiencing it? And in that, we get this question a lot. And I wonder if you've gotten this question a lot. Should I let my kid come to the viewing, the gravesite, the funeral? How do you talk with families who are asking you that question?
I just tell them it didn't kill me. I hate to say it that way, but honestly, it didn't. I remember being a little girl and my mom and my grandma's being on the missionary society at church, and we would literally go to people's homes, into nursing homes, and these people were transitioning. We would lotion their legs and put chapstick on them and comb their hair and clean out their fridges, leave meals, change sheets, go to funerals. And it built character. It built an understanding of humanity. It built respect, And so that's my perspective. I know there's some people who have had traumatic experiences, or things like that would have traumatized them. So I never try to tell people what they should do. I just am honest about my
Mm.
experience.
It didn't kill you. And then you also became a funeral director. So there's that
Right?
aspect.
Something works.
I do want to ask some detaily questions about that. Because another thing that comes
Mhm.
up is, regardless if a child or a teen is going to attend a mourning ritual, a funeral, a celebration of life,
Mhm.
there's often questions like you had when you were 8. What's this box? What does cremation mean? What does burial mean? Do you have suggestions for how to explain some of those terms to kids?
What I would do, depending on the child's age, but now I've seen children as young as 1 having iPads, which is mind blowing to me. I would get creative in my response and say, this is a casket. This is how you spell casket. Let's Google casket and see what comes up. And of course, probably having done some preliminary work, because there's a couple dark things on the internet. We can't deny that. But educating the child and yourself. If you don't know the answer, go do a Google search together. And again, I'm not a professional, so I'm going to say this based on my opinion. Don't tell children that grandma went to sleep because I was terrified to go to sleep for a while after I was told my great grandma had gone to sleep forever. You know what I mean? And it was said so innocently because, again, trying to explain to the mind of a child, grandma's passed away or grandma has died, and this is what death is. Again, they're learning just as much from us as we're learning from them, I'd imagine. And so those seeds that we're planting are important. I was literally just writing for a project that I'm working on, and it came up within me that at my great grandmother's funeral, that was the first time I saw my mom cry. As a child, that was terrifying. That was the first time that I saw my grandfather be physically supportive and physically touching my grandmother that I remember. So that moment meant something. Like I said, I may not have had the words to articulate what I was 7, 8 years old. But now as an adult, it's like, oh wow, these were the first times I witnessed these things as a child. What if it's hitting me like this now? I wonder what it did to me at 7, 8 years old. Something changed. And so explaining what might happen physically, you may see a lot of people hugging or touching that you normally wouldn't see doing that. And here's why. This is a comfort offering, or this is consoling someone. I think we're afraid to have those conversations because we're afraid of what that means as adults. It makes the reality of death that much more real. But I can understand how it can be overwhelming for a child to experience those things for the first time.
Well, and as adults too, because we've had an accumulation of experiences, we have a lot of shortcuts in our mind, right? That, oh,
Mhm.
yeah, people hug other people or pat them on the back when they're having a hard time or they're feeling sad. And for a child, like you said, it might be the first time they're witnessing certain people in their family do that. So to help preemptively like give information of like, if you see that, this is what might be going on, or you might see this, or you might hear this, or you might smell this, or you might experience this, to take down the confusion that can happen when there's so much new input, sensory input for kids in those experiences.
I had a lady tell me one time that she did not want her husband to have a casket spray because when she was a little girl, and I think it was either her uncle or her grandfather passed away, I don't remember, the casket spray fell off the casket and terrified her. And so as an adult, she couldn't stand to see them and she did not want her husband to have one. What if someone would have explained to her what happened? The tops of caskets are slippery. Somebody did not put that casket spray up there just right. It didn't mean that your grandpa kicked the casket or anything like that. But I mean, just think, I mean, it's funny to us, but she was afraid. And had someone just taken the time to explain what had happened or what could have happened to her, her husband could have had a beautiful casket spray.
And this is my ignorance. A casket spray is flowers.
The flowers on top of the casket, yes.
I'm so glad you shared that story because it makes me think we put a lot of energy and effort into informing kids ahead of time of what they might experience, but how important it might be to have a conversation after to say, what was that like for you? What parts did you like? What parts did you not like? Is there something you have a question about? Because then she could have had an opportunity to say, well, when that happened, I got really scared and thought this was going on. And someone could have provided some more concrete information in that moment. So we need like a exit interview or something for kids and
Yeah,
teens after that.
out to you. Because again, remember, they are on a completely different level than we are. We're looking at things from here and up. They're down here, you know. I That's a whole nother story. I remember being a kid with my cousins, and we used to, I don't want to say break in, but there was a church on the corner of our neighborhood, and sometimes they'd have wakes there at night. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with what a wake is, in the South, we have a lot of times a traditional funeral, which includes the body being taken to the church or at the funeral home chapel, and the community comes in and visits for a designated amount of time before the actual service or the night before. And so we would run into the church after the funeral director would go back and, wait. Sometimes they go in the back and do something or wait in the hearse or whatever. Before the family and everybody came, we would sneak into the church and go look at the person, and everybody would dare me to touch them because I was the only one that would dare touch the deceased. But I remember as a child looking up into the casket and seeing the what I now know is cotton that was stuffed into the nose of the deceased to prevent purge, which is liquid or fluid from coming out of the nose. And I just remember it being a white ball and not understanding why this person had a white ball in their nose. And so now that experience as a child, I teach people when you put that cotton in there, get some black eyeliner or mascara, put it on your makeup brush and conceal that white because we're not going to see it looking down, but somebody could see it looking up, you know?
What are some ways that you're tending to yourself and to grief these days?
I think I'm being a lot more patient with myself and extending the grace and kindness that I extend to others to myself. And I am walking like crazy. Like as soon as this call is over, I keep looking out the window because it's so bright and sunny and blue outside. I'm going for a nice long walk. I'm at my favorite trail. And being more intentional about caring for my body and my mind, what comes in, what goes out. and just trying to be as authentic as possible.
Well, thank you so much, Joél, for that. It feels like a lovely prescription for all of us these days, especially the piece of like, what are we taking in? Because it has an impact for sure. Well, I am grateful to you for all of the wisdom and insight and stories that you shared with us today. I imagine some of our listeners are like, I would like more of this time with Joél. So where should people head to find you?
You can Google The Grave Woman. I am everywhere from Instagram to Facebook, YouTube. My website is thegravewoman.com. My podcast will also pop up, the Death and Grief Talk podcast with The Grave Woman. So Google me.
Well, and listeners, I will find a few of those links and list them for you in the show notes. And Joél, yeah, thank you for taking so much time and energy to share with me and our listeners today. I'm very grateful.
Thank you for having me.
And listeners out there, you know, I'm very grateful for you for all the times that you tune in, the shows you listen to, the episodes you share with other people who you think might be helped or supported in some way by what we are talking about here. If you want to connect with me, you can email me at griefoutloud@dougy.org. That's dougy.org. That's our main website, and there you'll find all of our free downloadable resources, information about our local programming, and of course, each and every episode of Grief Out Loud. I'm always excited to share that the podcast is sponsored in part by the Chester Stephan Endowment Fund. Grief Out Loud is a production of Dougy Center, the National Grief Center for Children and Families in Portland, Oregon. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us again next time.